What's up guys, my name is Ace, and earlier this week for Black Ops 6, we did get a blog post outlining a bunch of the changes that we can expect from beta to launch, and while I already covered the details on that in a separate video, which I will leave linked down below, another thing they included in that blog post was map overviews for all of the remaining maps that we can expect in the game at launch. And I really felt that deserved a video of its own, so that's what we're going to be covering today. We're going to be going through looking at all of these map overviews, and I'm just going to be sharing my initial thoughts on these, at least based on what we're seeing here. Obviously, this is before we have gameplay time on this, but it's still something I want to talk about. Also, of course, I'm not going to be talking about the beta maps at all in this video, since that's something where we've all been there, done that. We already know what those look like. And another thing to mention here is Treyarch said these aren't necessarily finalized, and some pieces of cover, for instance, may be different in the full build of the game. And with that in mind, let's dive into Vault. And Vault, we actually have a decent amount of footage of. We actually get a really nice fly-through of this from the multiplayer trailer, so we actually get a really good indication of how this is actually laid out. But then here's the overview as well of Vault. And with this one, we can see it's a very standard 3-lane style design, a very rectangular shaped 3-lane design, which I generally find to be the best overall style of a 3-lane design. And we'll talk about that more as we go through some of the other maps, but based on what I'm seeing here structure-wise, I'm actually quite liking what I'm seeing here when it comes to Vault. And honestly, I definitely see this potentially becoming one of my favorite launch maps for Black Ops 6 because of this general shape and structure. Now, another key thing to point out here is there is an underground route here that goes through the vault itself, which you can access right through the floor of the middle building. And speaking of that middle building, this is one of those style of maps, where most of the map is generally open, but then there is the central building where a lot of the fighting is going to take place. It looks like that top lane, as we're looking at it right now, that's going to be a really solid sniper lane, whereas the middle is going to be a bit more close range, and then the left side seems like there's a little bit of everything there. You could probably navigate through that lane really nicely in close quarters, or you could try to set yourself up at a bit of a distance there. And so generally speaking, just looking at the elements we can see so far, I'm actually quite liking what I'm seeing here when it comes to Vault, and I do think this is going to be one of the better maps in the full build of the game. Next up, let's talk about Lowtown, and this is one of the maps that we actually got tons of little gameplay clips from the initial reveal of Black Ops 6. And honestly, I wasn't sure if this was two separate maps, just looking at those gameplay clips, or one map, and it is one map, so it looks like there's a lot going on with this. And looking at the general overview and structure, the first big thing to point out here is there's a lot of water on this map, and it looks like you're going to be able to traverse much of the map in that water. So I'm definitely curious to see how that plays out. This one definitely has the most water out of any of the maps in the game. And another thing you may have missed unless you took a close look at this, it looks like there's going to be an underwater route as well through this area that will also come up through the well in the center of that sort of courtyard area. And that seems pretty interesting as well. So I definitely think there's a lot of room for some cool sneaky plays here. If you like underwater combat, I think this is going to be an excellent map. Another general thing I wanted to point out with this is it does seem like there are very distinct areas that are pretty disconnected because of that water. And I think that's absolutely going to come into play as far as how this map ends up flowing as well. I have a bit of a concern with map flow when it comes to respawn game modes on this because of that. But of course, time will tell on that. I can't really say for sure until we get our hands on it and get playing it. At the end of the day, I don't really see this as being a really highly competitive map, but it may be a nice, fun, open map where there's a lot of room and a lot of freedom to do kind of whatever you want on this. So I really don't think this is going to be my favorite map in the game, nowhere close to it, but it looks like it's going to be a nice change of pace map that will play very different from the rest of the maps in the game. After that, though, we've got Payback, and this is one of the maps where we have very few clips, so therefore it's kind of hard to judge a lot of the areas. Even though we do get the nice map overview here, it's a bit confusing as far as how things are actually connected and where the different doorways are and different levels and things like that. So I do have a lot of questions about this map, and I definitely want to see more on this one compared to what we've seen so far, but it does appear to be a general 3-lane design. Again, the same sort of design where we have that central building, and that actually takes up a good portion of this map as well. So I believe a lot of the fighting is going to be taking place in that center house, and therefore I think it's going to be a lot of close quarters action. I think this is going to be a very shotgun and SMG dominated map, depending on how shotguns end up being balanced. And another little concern I have here with a map like this is aerial streaks are probably not going to be super effective on this based on what I'm seeing if most of the people are going to be inside. And I don't think there are too many areas where there's like an open ceiling where streaks can access the players that are inside that building. Outside of that though, I don't really have too much to say about Payback simply because we haven't seen nearly enough for me to provide much of an opinion on this. As for the next one, this is Redguard, and Redguard appears to be one of the biggest, if not the biggest map that we're going to have access to for the launch of the game. Keeping in mind, Treyarch has stated that none of their maps for launch are considered to be large size, They're all small to medium, but this one's definitely on the larger medium side as far as I can tell right here. And with this, once again, it looks like we're going to be seeing a very general 3-lane design, although this one does appear to have quite a bit of interconnectedness between those lanes. So it seems like you can jump between the lanes very easily on this. And I would say based on what I'm seeing here, it looks like there's a fair amount of complexity as well compared to many of the other maps that we've seen so far in the game, including the beta maps. This one really seems like it's going to take a while to learn all the ins and outs, since there are a lot of little routes it looks like and plenty of pieces of cover, so learning all those lines of sight and those angles I think is going to be a little more challenging on this map compared to some of the others, at least based on what we've seen so far, which is very little to be fair. Now, let's move on to what I believe is going to be the smallest core map, so non-strike map, the smallest core map in the entire game, at least until Nuketown comes around, and this is Subsonic. As you can see here, it is a very small, square-shaped design. When I say small, it's definitely not shipment small. I would even say it looks like it's noticeably larger than Nuketown, for instance, but not by a large degree, and honestly, that's not saying much because those maps are super tiny, so this definitely is going to be quite a small map for 6v6. I believe it's even going to be a little bit smaller than Babylon. Also, with that square shape, I'm a little concerned about the flow on this map. It's really hard to nail down spawns on a square-shaped map, especially a small square-shaped map. And also, the general flow on maps like this tends to be very circular. And for me at least, I'm generally more of a fan of linear design rather than a square-shaped design with a lot of circular flow. But that's just my preference at least. At the end of the day, I do like some variety as well. I don't want every map to have the same general layout and the same general flow, so as far as a change of pace goes, I'm on board with it, but I have some concerns about their spawns on this, as well as cover placement. There doesn't appear to be a whole lot of cover to be utilizing on this map, and when you combine that with the fact that it is fairly small, I think it's going to be pretty chaotic. Next up, let's talk about Vorkuta, which is the only snowy map that we have in the game at launch, it looks like. And with this, we have seen a few little clips, that diving shotgun clip, this is inside the mine area, as well as a couple other little clips we've seen in the past. There weren't a ton, but there were a couple sprinkled in there. And when it comes to the overall layout of this, it is very clearly a 3-lane design. However, this is where I'm going to bring up that rectangular design that I generally prefer, and why I generally prefer that. With this style of a 3-lane design that we're seeing on Vorkuta, we're seeing it really narrow down toward the ends of the map, where the primary spawn locations tend to be. And that can often create issues with a lack of options as well as spawn trapping. Because if you just picture yourself spawning in those areas, and let's just say the enemies have pushed up at least to the halfway point on the map, maybe a little bit farther, you don't have that much room to spread out immediately as you come out of spawn and choose like a left or right lane, which take you noticeably out to the side. In this case, everything is really compressed on the ends. And I do fear that that will be acting a bit like a funnel, which is very easy to lock down from that central map position. And I do think this also makes it very hard to balance secondary spawns. If one person pushes up toward the enemy spawn, like right in that spawn location, where does that push their secondary spawn? Does that mean we're going to be seeing mid-map spawns a lot? Because for me, mid-map spawns, especially on a more linear map like this, they don't tend to work very well. They can feel very random, and it really can destroy flow. So then at that point, do you have to fully flip the spawns to the other side? And therefore, are the spawns just going to be constantly flipping back and forth? Those are just a few concerns that I have. Aesthetically, I really like the looks of the map. I hope I'm wrong on a couple of these areas, like how the spawns are going to play out and that general funneled feeling with spawn trapping. But of course, I'm going to keep an open mind. We haven't played on the map yet. I want to see how it ends up playing out. I just have a few concerns with it. Now, finally, for the core maps that we didn't have access to play on in the beta, but we kind of could check this map out in the training area, at least for the beta, this is Protocol. And I hope many of you guys got a chance to at least explore this a little bit in that training area, so you can see generally how this is laid out. But with this, it is a general 3-lane structure, just like most of the maps in this game. However, it is worth noting on the middle map area, on the upper elevation part, so not that top lane, but the other 2 lanes, they do kind of converge in that center area, and there really isn't any clear definition between those lanes. So effectively speaking, I do think this is going to play a bit more like a 2-lane map rather than a 3-lane map. Additionally, the big key element with this map are these 2 central buildings here that kind of fight against each other and overlook each other and overlook the middle of the map. This is a design that we see in many maps, like Nuketown, for instance. It has a very similar design like this, with the 2 buildings overlooking the central area, and these will likely become those camper magnets. However, if you explored this map a little bit, you'll notice there were a bunch of access points into these buildings, and I think that is excellent. So it's still going to be attracting those people that just want to get up there, sit in the window, have a nice overview of the middle of the map. You can pick off plenty of kills from there. However, in order to counter those people, it looks like there's going to be plenty of ways to approach them and counter them. It looks like there is a good amount of room to breathe in the spawns, which I really like. I think there's lots of room to push to secondary spawns back there without fully flipping the spawns or forcing a mid-map spawn, which I think is excellent. And overall, I do see this map playing out reasonably well. The only real concern I have here is the fact that toward the middle, I believe it's going to play a bit more like a 2-lane map rather than a 3-lane map. And that may lead to a feeling that you have a lack of an ability to properly flank enemy players, and you'll kind of be forced into the combat with those 2 lanes. And with that, that's it when it comes to all of the core maps that we can expect at launch, combined with the beta maps, of course, that we didn't talk about in today's video. Now there's just one strike map to cover here that we didn't have access to in the beta, and this is called Warhead, previously labeled as Sandhouse. That's why it says it on the screen there. And this one is effectively the destroyed version of Nuketown, although it's laid out nothing like Nuketown. Like, you'll definitely see some familiar elements and assets from Nuketown, but this is absolutely not Nuketown. This is a totally different map. And of course, it is tiny, but it is a strike map, so it's just designed for 2v2 or 6v6 face-off. It's not going to be in regular core rotation. So with that in mind, there's really not much to say about this as far as how I feel it's going to play, because it's going to play like the other face-off maps. It's going to be chaotic and crazy. I really like the aesthetic and the general theme, so there's that familiarity with Nuketown, but it's not going to play anything like Nuketown. And speaking of Nuketown, I do want to mention here, it's fully expected that Nuketown will be coming to the game a little bit after launch. Oftentimes, Treyarch likes bringing Nuketown in like within the first 3 weeks or so of the game launching, and I suspect that's going to be the case again because it is not listed as one of the launch maps in the game, and it's confirmed that all of our launch maps will be originals. And there we go. That's going to wrap it up for today's video. Just my general thoughts on each of these maps based on what we're seeing so far. Keeping in mind, of course, a lot of this is just speculation because you can only get so much from seeing a few clips and then the overhead map view. And at the end of the day, we won't really know how these play until we get our hands on them. And I'm really excited for that. Now, of course, I am curious to hear from you guys in those comments down below. Based on what we now have access to with these map overviews, what are your general thoughts on these maps so far? Just let me know down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.